on C-SPAN.
Dr. Qanta Ahmed, In the Land of Invisible Women is her book. What's it about?
The book, it details my 2-year journey working in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where I was practicing critical care medicine at a Saudi Arabian military hospital. Really medicine of a very high degree in an academic environment. I was the first woman hired to practice intensive care medicine there as an attending by a very progressive CEO who I discovered to be a Saudi male feminist. And so I was in both for an academic, clinical, and also geographical experience.
Were you allowed to practice medicine on men?
Yes. And in fact, postgraduate medicine in the kingdom is a desegregated area. So I took care of male patients, I taught male residents, and I worked with men the entire time. And through 2 years of taking care of Saudi patients who were very either well off or who were Bedouins, nobody ever objected to me because I was a woman. In fact, people were often thrilled to discover that I was a woman and that I was Muslim and that I was trained in the United States. They were particularly appreciative of that.
Why do you call it In the Land of Invisible Women?
I think this is a label that has been given to it because we don't know much about women in the kingdom. The image that comes to mind about the women is always of the veil, but I think really also we don't hear many of their accounts, and so perhaps that's an appropriate way to describe it. But we find that the reason that they're invisible is we haven't examined their lives or stories sufficiently, and I think this book attempts to correct some of those deficiencies.
Are there a lot of women doctors in Saudi Arabia?
Yes, many of my colleagues were very accomplished physicians, pediatric surgeons, infectious disease specialists, vascular surgeons, obstetricians, and that's growing because teaching, nursing, and medicine are some of the most socially acceptable professions for Saudi women, though we have also Saudi women who are now female engineers at Aramco. So women in Saudi Arabia are highly accomplished and highly ambitious for their own careers.
Women are not allowed to drive cars in Saudi Arabia.
That's true, and in the years that I lived there, I had to make that adjustment. I went from being a motorist to having to rely on a driver. I think that comes more from a cultural basis necessarily than from scripture in Islam, to my limited understanding. And now that women don't drive, there is a huge economy that supports the fact that women don't drive. So there are millions of drivers who are paid to provide that means to women. But I think eventually that's going to change. People seem to think that change is coming soon.
What other limitations or what other adjustments did you have to make while you were over there?
Well, I was born and raised in Britain and trained in the United States in a Muslim family where our Islam was very part of a pluralistic background. I was certainly not prepared for the legislation of the public space by religious authoritarians, by which I mean the Mutawa, the religious police. In the years that I lived there, 1999 to 2001, they were very, very active. And as a single woman with no male companion, I frequently attracted their attention. That I found not only intimidating, but fairly baseless if you are a thoughtful Muslim and understand that to be a real Muslim, you must have the capacity to have a free will. There can be no sincere belief as a Muslim if you're compelled to do something. And so that was probably the most difficult adjustment I had to make.
Could you and I sit and have coffee at a cafe in Riyadh?
It depends where you go. Of course, it is not allowed for you to be in male company with people to whom you're not related, but in private homes you may have friendships, or in certain venues which were not frequented by the religious police, usually because of their patronage. A certain section of the royal family would be more tolerant of that, and so we would find those ways, but certainly one was much more inhibited than we might be here in DC.
In the Land of Invisible Women. It's written by Qanta Ahmed M.D. You're currently practicing in South Carolina, correct?
Yes, correct.
Where?
Charleston, South Carolina.